Welcome to Talking Stuff on 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV, and 10 TV Plus. I am Jeremy Birmingham. This is the Austin and Birm Show. Talking Stuff, for those of you unaware, is the show where I talk about recruiting and recruiting stuff with recruits, players, coaches, other analysts around the nation, etc. Today, I'm going to be joined by LettermanRow.com's Mick Walker, who is going to help me break down the big visitors list Ohio State has on tap for Texas. And we're going to take a look back at the last few months and try to dissect and try to figure out exactly what happened to Ohio State's recruiting class, which now sits as the number 9 ranked class in the country. And the Buckeyes are looking for a little bit of momentum. So enough of me. Let's bring in Mick Walker from LettermanRow.com and get started on this episode of Talking Stuff. Joined now by Mick Walker of LettermanRow.com, Letterman Row YouTube channel on the YouTube, because otherwise it wouldn't be the Letterman Row YouTube channel. Mick, thank you for taking time out of your day to join me on this episode of Talking Stuff. How are you?
I'm doing great, Birm. This is something you and I have talked about for the better part of the past decade or so. So it's better. It's good.
Well, you talked about it. I did a lot of shoulder shrugging and trying to defer and deter you, but here you are. You made it. How's it feel to be on Talking Stuff, Mick, after all these years?
It's good. I mean, I've been talking stuff with you for, like we said, 5-6 years now. So now we get to actually record it and monetize it and have people listen to it.
Yeah, we did it. You beat the respect out of me. Congrats. I'm proud of you. It's taken you years, but no, for those of you who are listening and who have followed my work for a long time, who may be new to Mick was someone that started reaching out to me. What, you were like 16 or so at the time, talking about your love for recruiting. And I've always, and I know that you're not comfortable when I compliment you, Nickelodeon, but I think that your passion, it is hard to replicate, because we live in a world right now, and in a time in the recruiting world especially, where it's easy to be dispassionate about recruiting right now, because there's just so many things that go on that feel a little bit untoward, or perhaps not like the traditional things that we fell in love with when I started following recruiting when I was 8 years old. So I appreciate you. I'm glad that you're on the show, and you're the first non-bald friend of mine to be on Talking Stuff in this role. So let's just dive in. It's been a weird few months for Ohio State recruiting. There has been, it's an odd combination, because there's simultaneously been like nothing to talk about for the last month and a half, and except for the bad stuff. And like the bad stuff has been, it's not like it's been stuff that we are surprised by in many ways. I mean, we can certainly go back to mid-July, and I think it's worth doing that as we wrap up the last couple of weeks of recruiting, to the Jacob Weatherspoon decommitment / flip from Ohio State to North Carolina. That was one that, like, there are times when you lose 5-star recruits to other programs that you can justify it, you can write it off, you can rationalize it. There's a million different ways you can say, yeah, but we didn't really need this guy, or yeah, but we have 3 other players committed at his position, or yeah, but this guy lives in Texas and it's fine. When Ohio State loses a commitment from the player who was the first commitment in the class of 2026, to North Carolina.
Defensive, by the way. You forget Chris Henry.
First defensive commitment. I don't consider Chris as being fully committed until the spring, when he said he was done. I guess that's the lesson here, though. No one's fully committed. So when Jacob Weatherspoon from Avon, Ohio, flips to North Carolina, of all places, what is your first reaction? Is it, oh no, the Buckeyes dropped the ball, or, oh, well, this is just the way college football recruiting is going to go from now on, because he's not player 1A on the Buckeyes big board, and he probably is at North Carolina, and they're going to just pay him more?
Yeah, my first reaction was probably, oh no, why would Birm take a river cruise tonight? But once I got past that, it was just...
Well, that was my first day back on LettermanRow.com and my written work, so that was bad luck, Mick. That's what that was. That was bad luck and bad timing.
I think this is a little bit of bad luck for Ohio State recruiting too, because you mentioned all the yeah buts you would hear, but Albert Hill goes to USC, Victor Singleton goes to Texas A&M, but yeah, but we still got Jacob Weatherspoon, who we like, who people would say they like just as much, and then you lose him to North Carolina, and like you said, Obviously, North Carolina could give him a little bit more money or prioritize him in a different way, but that's still a position, regardless of whether Ohio State thought he was the top guy on the board or the 10th guy on the board. They still needed that position. All you have right now is Jordan Thomas, who, again, Ohio State will tell you they love a ton, and I saw him last season. Saw him last spring. I think he's a great prospect, but you can't sign one cornerback, especially after you signed essentially one last cycle, and depending on how Jordan Woods develops. So,
yeah, I mean, Jordan Woods is certainly not a player you're counting on for the next 2 years. So, in this era, and I think that's what you're getting at, is like, yeah, Ohio State maybe didn't have Jacob Weatherspoon as number one on their overall board, but like the Buckeyes still need players too. Like it's not like you can just. This is the real challenge of this new recruiting minefield that's out there. Is that like, yeah, Ohio State, maybe Jacob Weatherspoon is number 8 on the Ohio State board, but like they took his commitment because they're like, you're a dude that can play for us. And then just because another team says we're going to pay you more money, then all of a sudden, like Ohio State can't pay every player like number 1 spot on the board type of money. Like that's impossible. So the expectation has to change. For who? Is the expectation have to change for the coaches, or does the expectation have to change for the fan base that's watching this and saying, hey, there's 3 top flight cornerbacks in the state of Ohio in Albert Hill and Victor Singleton and Jacob Weatherspoon, and now none of them are going to Ohio State, when 2 years ago Tim Walton seemed like he was the recruiter that could just go in and do whatever he wanted, and now it looks like he's on the defensive quite a bit. And I think that people, which set of expectations in your mind, Mick, need to be adjusted more?
I truthfully, I do think it's Tim Walton's expectation of the Ohio State coaching staff, whether it's just building a bigger board or having more guys that are like, because other than Jacob Weatherspoon and Jordan Thomas, who took official visits in June, the only other cornerback that took an official visit was Danny Odom, who we both know was right down to the 11th hour, had committed to Ohio State. And then you and I were texting that night, boom, it flipped over and he's going to Nebraska. He's still committed to Nebraska, and we can talk more about him later in a different segment. But I just don't think that's a sustainable way to live, especially knowing you needed 3 cornerbacks and you had your 2. But then I think as June went along as well, they figured out that Jacob Weatherspoon was looking around, took some official visits elsewhere. And now you go into the season, similar position where Tim Walton was last cycle, of needing more cornerbacks when a lot of these guys are committed and at this point probably signed at some level of NIL commitment to their current schools.
Yeah, it's really puzzling because, and we've seen it out of Tyler Bowen since he took over at Ohio State for Justin Fry in February. Like, you are not going to get all of your top targets unless your name is Brian Hartline, I guess. And even in that case, Brian Hartline's had to readjust the way that he approaches recruiting a little bit. So if you're not rapidly expanding that recruiting board, if you're not out there offering maybe 50% more guys than you have in the last few years, you find yourself, I think, in a position where you could wake up one day and be in Tim Walton's shoes and say, well, now I only have Jordan Thomas committed. And again, to your point, he's the number 19 ranked cornerback in the country, but that is a guy that has absolutely been number 1 on the Ohio State board at that spot for a year. So yeah, you have your top guy, but then you have no one else. And where do you go from here as you enter the season, which is underway in earnest around the country? Yeah, you're going to see a guy or two that's going to have a big start to his senior season that maybe captures your attention. But at this point, as you said, like, it's probably too late in most cases to really pivot, because we have no idea. And I don't think the schools themselves or the coaches or even the players and their parents / agents / representatives have any idea like what these NIL deals that have been signed, how they are going to lock kids into recruitments that, let's call a spade a spade. There's a outside chance that North Carolina, with 70 new players on its roster this year, could win 2 games. And I'm not saying Bill Belichick's going to get fired. But let's say that they go out there and they go 2-9 or 3-8. Is that still where you want to go if you're if you're Jacob Weatherspoon? Now he's in a position where he's just shopping himself around, but Ohio State will not come back to him and say, hey, hey, guess what, Jacob, it's totally fine. You weren't entirely upfront with us about everything, but we forgive you. Please come back. Like, this is Ohio State. Like, they're not going to do that. They're just going to say, hey, we'll just make up for it in the transfer portal. But as you said, it's a dangerous way to live.
Yeah, especially because you and I were talking about a guy named Truly Bell from Pittsburgh, California. He's a talented guy, camped at Ohio State, 26 corner. And it's like he's a really talented player that you could try and develop similar to a Jordan Woods, but he's a third cornerback at Ohio State. Like he needs a year or two to develop before you can actually play him. So then even if you went out, offered him next week and took his commitment, you still need a second cornerback that you can kind of go out and play. And there's just not that many names on the board. And for a lot of those guys, you and I have heard some names, and it's like if you look at their class, that's the top cornerback on the board for another Big Ten school or an ACC school. Like, you're going to go give him more money, you're going to flip him away. And then obviously with Jordan Woods, like last cycle, that can happen. But then that's one of those situations. He's lower ranked, committed to Cincinnati. Like, are you trying to flip him with money, or are you just trying to say, come to Ohio State? And I think
that worked for Jordan Woods. It didn't work for Aiden West last year when Ohio State tried that, and he ended up sticking with Michigan State because the Spartans were able to turn around and say, hey, you've been our number one guy the whole time. We'll give you more money. Don't go there. And so it will be interesting. This weekend, Ohio State has, we'll talk about visitors as we get further along in this episode of Talking Stuff. But, there's going to be more than 100 recruits in town, and like there's not going to be many 2026s that aren't committed to Ohio State visiting. So this is not going to be the weekend where we get answers for that. But let's stick in the summer if we can, Mick, and we talk about Jacob Weatherspoon and where that started. Every other decision really that happened from the minute that Luke Wafel waffled and went back to USC, it seems like Ohio State has been a little bit on its heels and trying to figure out where is the best place to put money, where is the best place to put resources and time and energy. Luke Wafel, the Buckeyes are obviously still going to try and flip him. That'd be silly not to. Yeah, but again, as we said, like there's not a lot of known factors when it comes to the NIL and how those deals are locking kids in. In the last month, we've seen Derek Cooper commit to Texas. We saw Tyler Atkinson commit to Texas. We saw Felix Ojo commit to Texas Tech for a lot of money. Ohio State at the end of that battle, and I know this will come across as sour grapes or scarlet and gray colored glasses or whatever, but by the time that was happening, I think Ohio State was okay with Felix Ojo going somewhere else because they've seen so much out of Sam Greer to be like, oh, we've got our 5-star offensive tackle.
Your first round pick tackle, if we're using the terms from Mark Pantone.
Right. If we're using Mark Pantone's, terminology for the way that he sees this now. Jake Krull, Ohio State did not really attempt to recruit, even though he made an official visit. He was not really looked at as the type of defensive end that they need in this class. You had decisions being made from Darius Gray and Braylon Womack, of course, who committed to Auburn last week. He's sort of the last one of this group of stragglers in the class of 2026. Which recruitment do you think will hurt the most of the guys that Ohio State lost in this last month? And I say lost with an asterisk because you can't lose something you don't have. But which one of those that we felt like Ohio State was involved with in really in touch with, do you feel like will be the one that comes back to bite you a little bit?
I think we got to go back to Luke Wafel just because once you look at this edge room, if some of these guys perform how you think they could this year or how we think they could this year, they could be gone. Some guys graduate, and then you're looking at, I know that you've told me multiple times, and I know you've said it on other podcasts here, but they think Kari Wilder can play early. He can play as a freshman. But beyond that, Zion Grady, maybe Epi Satanale can play, but it's not a lot of depth in that room, especially when you're only taking one guy this cycle. It's similar to what we mentioned with Tim Walton earlier. If Larry Johnson's going to work such a small board, you got to hit on your top guys. And if you miss on Luke Wafel, if he goes somewhere else, you're kind of sitting here holding a bag of money, even if you try to offer Luke Wafel a good amount.
Yeah, and that is the challenge, I think, because you want to be able to properly assign blame, I guess, which, I mean, it's not our place, of course, to blame coaches if a player goes somewhere else, but it is hard to know exactly how much weight to give each factor in these decisions because, yeah, money is a huge part of it. We know that. That is the reality when it comes to college football nowadays. But Ohio State was offering Luke Wafel a pretty decent sum of cash in order to come and be one of the two defensive ends in this class because they believe that he, like Kari Wilder, is as ready to play next season as any defensive end in the country in the high school ranks. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for guys, the guys that Ohio State circles as that first round pick, as Mick just described it. Those players are the ones that Ohio State is going to pay big money to. And like, there's not going to be 15 of them every cycle. This year, I think if we're talking about Ohio State, Mick, we probably have 5 or 6 of those guys in this class, right? You start with Chris Henry, then you go to Caden Dixon Wyatt, then you go to Sam Greer,
Blaine Bradford,
Kari Wilder, Jordan Thomas, right? So there's 6 guys right there that of the 21 commitments that Ohio State believes are first round picks. And that's pretty good, especially if you're the one program in your weight class that is trying to find balance between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. So I think it's just an interesting time because we can't absolve the coaches when it's clear that they are not recruiting enough players, understanding that this is the way of college football now, right? Like there is no excuse to be made to say, well, we just didn't know that it was going to go this way. Like that's the way it's gone for the last 3 years. So, and what I think is interesting at Ohio State, and some of this is, and I'm going to say this and it's going to sound negative, but I swear I don't mean it to be. It's the Buckeye arrogance a little bit to say like, hey, we're Ohio State. We only need to recruit the guys that we genuinely believe are difference makers at Ohio State. So over the last few years, we saw Justin Fry was pilloried for his a recruiting board and how small it was. But that's been Larry Johnson's way for the last couple of years. It's become Brian Hartline's way. He doesn't go after a lot of guys. He takes a very sniper approach. James Laurinaitis is doing that now. We see Carlos Lachlan, especially, we'll talk about it, the class of 2026 or 2027. He's doing the same thing. Tim Walton has taken that approach. So now it's like every coach on the coaching staff is shrinking the number of targets they're really going after in a way that makes you go, that is a interesting approach, knowing full well that when someone that you have circled as a top priority ends up going to USC because they're taking, dumps of cash on their face. I don't know what that means.
That's like, exactly the way to describe it, I believe.
Yeah, like then you're left holding the bag, like, and you're going, hey, well, we offered a fair amount, and maybe you did, but the fair amount doesn't matter. And now there's no one to turn around and give it to. So it's an interesting thing. And Blaine Bradford, obviously, we're going to discuss him when we get into the visitors for this weekend. But now you start to see the flip side of that. It's like, oh, this is the guy that committed early, and now his father is reaching out to Sam Spiegelman of Rivals and On 3 and saying, well, we'd like to see what's out there. Ohio State hasn't done anything wrong, and so like I'm trying to figure out nowadays, like, what is the value for Ohio State when it comes to being committed to the players that are committed to them. I said it talking about you earlier, like I appreciate your passion for this, because I think a lot of people have just been dispirited from the way that recruiting is going, because if a kid is committed for 5 months without any hints or chirps or words about having interest elsewhere, and then all of a sudden it's the weekend of the first game of the season, and now that player and his representatives they're just going to walk up to you and say, actually, we need more. And like it's just very frustrating for everyone involved.
Very. It's interesting because you and I, the past couple of weeks, talking about the Braylon Womack commitment being like, oh, if you go to Braylon and you say, I'm going to give him $10, and Blaine says, hey, I need $10 as well because you're giving it to Braylon. And now obviously you're in a position where Braylon Womack goes somewhere else, and Blaine can kind of look at you and be like, oh, you really needed Braylon, and you also really need me. Because I think it's pretty
now
clear.
I need $22. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty clear when you talk about these first round picks, or just like if Ohio State had a list of 3 or 4 positions where they said we need to get a guy, it was clear that offensive tackle's been one for a while. Safety's been one. And obviously with the idea that you could lose Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis potentially if they have good years, you go get a guy like Chris Henry Jr. and Caden Dixon Wyatt. Like wide receiver was one. Ryan Day went out and saw Braylon Womack and Blaine Bradford right after the national championship. That was clearly a need. So you have to get that first round safety, but now you're getting, like you said, kind of raked over the coals, and that's another position where like McElroy's done a lot of good work, but realistically, he probably has one safety committed if we view Simeon Caldwell as maybe a linebacker down the line.
Which we do. I mean, down the line, we certainly do. And again, that's where I think sometimes there's like an attempt to be almost too cute, like because Jacob Weatherspoon was being held against Ohio State as a safety in some ways, and so Simeon Caldwell, because Ohio State is saying, well, yeah, he's going to come in as a safety, Simeon will, but he's going to probably grow to a linebacker. That's all we keep hearing. But yet Jacob Weatherspoon is like, no, we see him as a corner. We see him as a corner. But everyone else is telling these kids, oh, we see you as Ohio State actually sees you as a safety. And then it's easier for North Carolina to turn around and be like, no, we actually do see you as a corner. And we like it's just become so convoluted and so messy. Mick, but the question is, and it's the question I asked Ross Bjork at Big Ten Media Days. It's a question I've asked Mark Pantoni. It's a question I've asked Ryan Day. Like, what does it mean to pivot on NIL? What is a pivot for Ohio State? Because clearly the Buckeyes have fallen short when it comes to the upfront offer to high school elite prospects, right? Elite high school prospects. They're not. I can't imagine. I'm stammering here, but I don't believe that Ohio State would be the highest offer to any player they've signed in the last 3 years.
I'd assume that's accurate, even if you include Jeremiah Smith, who obviously is making insane amounts of money, but I think Miami was willing to give him essentially the whole 305, the whole area down there. Yeah. So.
And so, like, that being the case, I don't think that's ever going to change. And I think that there is a fundamental disconnect that people have established, which is, what does it mean to pivot? Because pivoting here does not mean, at least in my opinion, and I want to be clear, I think Ohio State is starting that pivot, but it does not mean they're all of a sudden going to start offering every high school player millions of dollars. Like that's just not going to happen. They're still not changing the philosophy of what guides them on the NIL front, which is retain your best players on your roster, supplement it with elite high school talent, and then go out and win in the transfer portal with proven players. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think that even with the collectives, the 1870 Society, the Foundation, those groups now apparently being revitalized and reworked to work alongside the Buckeye Sports Group, because Ohio State believed initially that collectives were going to be ruled irrelevant and moot. So the Buckeyes had set those two to be somewhat dormant. That's not the case now. But really what the pivot means, from what I've been able to gather from people, is that it just means that there's more flexibility with how the Buckeyes can arrange payments for players. And there was a ton of discussion in the spring about upfront payments, trying to get ahead of the House versus the NCAA settlement, which happened on June 6th. And I think people believe that Ohio State wasn't involved in those upfront payments. You know what I mean? But they absolutely were. And we'll go back to Kari Wilder, for example. Like, I don't see any other scenario where a California defensive end who has like nothing but a roller coaster ride to the top of the rankings and everything that he's going to be on was offered by Ohio State 3 weeks before he made his first visit and then committed right away. Like, I hope people aren't naive enough to think that happens simply because this kid from Gardena, California fell so madly in love with Ohio State on his first visit that he could never imagine being anywhere else. Like, clearly Ohio State offered and had figured out monetarily that they felt that Kari Wilder was worth it. And so they got aggressive. And so now the question is, how do you get aggressive between now and December? And are there players even available to get aggressive for? And that's where things are going to get super weird over these next 2 months. And so, like, I think people are going to be expecting immediate results when it comes to this pivot. But at the same time, like, everyone is like reading contracts and trying to figure out what it means when a player commits somewhere and takes money. So, like, there's no reasonable expectation for NIL driven recruiting wins to just immediately start back up. Do you think I'm crazy for that?
No, I definitely don't. I think you've written about it this week at Letterman Row about the idea of a pivot. I think Steve Wilfong from Rivals has also written about it, and I think a few other people around our site have talked about it. But even when you talk about the pivot, it's really just, can we go get Luke Wafel? Like that. Yeah. That's really the biggest. We'll be able to kind of muster off enough to get Luke Wafel, and can we get maybe Danny Odom back from Nebraska and have a second cornerback? It's not like let's go get Braylon Womack back, or let's go get this sixth wide receiver or fifth offensive lineman. Like, they're not just trying to blow this class out, whether that's right or wrong. It's very clearly designed to fix some needs that after the summer they decided, well, the results just aren't good enough for. And whether that's having to pay for guys in the portal or pay guys in high school, they're just trying to figure out how you adjusted that to make sure that the results, and as everybody likes to say on this YouTube channel, the standard maintains the standard.
Yeah, the standard is the standard, and Ohio State's standard is to be a top 5 recruiting class in the country. Right now, the Buckeyes are number 9. We're talking with Mick Walker of LettermanRow.com, a part of the On3/Rivals family. Mick, as you look at what Ohio State is getting ready to do this weekend, as we said, more than 100 recruiting visitors coming into town. You were not on the sideline for the Ohio State Notre Dame game in 2022. I was. That game was probably the wildest I've ever seen as far as a recruiting presence, but also because like Joe Burrow was there and Chase Young was there, and all of the players who were there visiting were like just starstruck at the number of former Ohio State players that were there. I don't believe that Joe Burrow will be there this weekend. I'm not sure about Chase or anybody else, but obviously there will be a large former Buckeye NFL presence there. What about this weekend really stands out to you? Before we dive into the particulars of the visitors list, which areas do you think it's clear were the focus for this week?
Yeah, I think that the one that we have to go to right away, and it's going to be a thing when we talk about our most important visitors, is the defensive line group. Like, whether you get Luke Wafel or you don't get Luke Wafel this cycle, you probably need a first-round edge next cycle in 2027.
You probably need 2.
Probably need at least 2. And we even had somebody, you and I, when we were standing on the field walking off, saying, talking about maybe getting one of these guys, and they even said, hey, we need to get multiple of them. So yeah. you get a couple of those guys on campus this weekend, and that's immediately where my eyes goes. You flip side to the trenches, the offensive line's got a deep group as well, and we can kind of get into what that means with Tyler Bowen's whole big philosophy of getting a ton of different names on the board. But overall, I think it's those trenches, just because that's where Ohio State in recruiting has been up and down. I think the offensive line's been up, defensive line's been up and down both ways.
We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come right back with the visitors list for the weekend. It's not going to include all 100+ kids, but it's a pretty good sampling of what is expected at Ohio Stadium on Saturday. We'll be right back. We are back. Mick Walker of LettermanRow.com joins me, Jeremy Birmingham, here on 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV Plus, and anywhere you get audio podcasts. Thanks again to Mick for joining us. We're going to dive into the visitors list, and I want to be clear before I hit the next slide button, if for those of you watching it on the internet. I have not included any of Ohio State's commitments in these graphics. We fully expect that most of the 2026 commitments will be there. Brady Edmonds, the 2027 quarterback from California, was originally scheduled to be in town this weekend. He will not be. Jameer Brown, the only other commitment in the class of 2027 for Ohio State, will be on campus. And he will be a part of a pretty important group of wide receivers that are in town. And I know it's funny because Brian Hartline has spoiled people to the point over the last decade-ish where when Ohio State recruits elite level receivers, people are like, yeah, boring. This is boring. Who cares? We need help elsewhere. But man, the fact that the 3 best receivers in the country, at least in my opinion, and I am biased because I'm a Midwesterner myself, the fact that the 3 best receivers in the country are in Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, and they're all going to be on campus, and they've all been on campus multiple times together, is something. And that's Monshin Sales from Indiana and Dakota Garant from Michigan, who will be joining Ohio State's commitment, Jameer Brown, on campus. They are not alone, however, because we also have 5-star Easton Royal from Louisiana, got Keyshawn Bowman, a commitment for the Oregon Ducks from Tennessee visiting, Khalil Taylor, Penn State commit, Brian Porter, the younger brother of Ohio State freshman receiver Quincy Porter. And my choice for the best receiver in the country, regardless of high school class, is number 2028 wideout Eric McFarland from the IMG Academy, originally from Las Vegas. He will be back in town. There's still some discussion about Eric and a potential reclassification. I don't know what that would do to the 27 haul for Ohio State, but man, Mick, when we're going to hop around here, I'm starting there because I'm just always just fascinated by the influx of talent that Brian Hartline has provided in Columbus, but also this is weird because this is his first game as a play caller. He has been like knee deep in learning how to be a full-time offensive coordinator over these last few months. And I don't know that he's really that involved with Manchin Sales or Dakota Garant or any of these guys yet. And so, like, I think in some ways this weekend is actually an introduction. Like for Easton Royal, for example, again, it's hard to pull a 5-star receiver out of Louisiana. There's no other place in the country that has the ability to even discuss themselves as wide receiver U, other than the Tigers down at Louisiana State. But I think that it's interesting because we're finally going to see these relationships like kick up. And especially when it comes to Garant and Sales, like these dudes have been on campus a lot. And I don't think that either one of them have what I would consider like a prototypical Heartline and Target relationship yet. Do you think I'm crazy for that or what?
No, I think you're completely accurate. I think a lot of this so far has been done by kind of Devin Jordan, keeping guys relationship wise. Like I know Keyshawn Bowman, when I was talking to him about why he wanted to come up, he mentioned Devin Jordan by name, just saying he's kind of kept the contact going. And then I imagine it's the same for Easton Royal or even Khalil.
Yeah, I mean, I asked Easton Royal last week if he was coming, and he said yes. And I said, how much conversation have you had with Brian Hartline? He said none. Like at that point, Hartline didn't know he was coming, is what he told me. And I asked Brian Hartline on Wednesday night, coming off the field at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. I was asking about a couple of different guys and who might be showing up. And he said, I have no idea. I have not had any of these conversations. And Brian can be a little bit diffusive and dismissive at times, but like I completely believe him. I don't think he has any idea.
Yeah, and beyond, like we mentioned Sales and Garant and Eric McFarland, like a lot of these guys, he's kind of going to be shaking hands and meeting them for the first time. Like,
yeah,
there might have to be a recruiting staff for like a Mark Pantoni or somebody that comes up and goes, this is Easton Royal, Brian, or like so on and so forth. He'll know Dakota, he'll know Manchin, and obviously Eric, all those guys have been up a handful of times. But at this point in the recruiting cycle, especially now that he's the offensive coordinator, if you haven't been up multiple times, you're just not going to get Brian Hartline's full attention or not have that great a relationship with him because he's got so much other stuff on his plate. Like he's making sure Chris Henry Jr. and Kane Dixon Wyatt are staying committed. He's focusing on play calls for the Texas game. Like beyond the guys that actually get up to campus and camp and work out and spend time, like you just don't get a chance to have that much relationship with him.
Yeah, this is neither here nor there, apropos of nothing. I have this, like, you might be too young to remember Richard LeCount and his recruitment, but when Raekwon McMillan committed to Ohio State in 2013 as one of the 2014 class members, one of his best friends and like a little brother to him was Richard LeCount, who at the time was a 5-star safety from Georgia, Hinesville, Georgia, who was all about Ohio State, like loved Ohio State, visited all the time. And then in Richie's junior year, because he'd been up at Ohio State like so much freshman, sophomore year, that's when Georgia hired Kirby Smart, and it was like over immediately. There was no, but I asked Richie at one point, like, what made the difference? And one of the things he said was that all of his best relationships with the players at Ohio State were all the guys because Richie was in the class of 2017. He's like, so all the guys that I'm best friends with at Ohio State, none of them are going to be there by the time I would get to college. And I sense I feel a little bit the same way about Eric McFarland, that like, because he's so close with Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis and the South Florida Express gang, that I wonder if by the time he gets to campus as a 2028, if he stays at 2028, like all those guys will be gone. And I wonder how much that could potentially play into his eventual recruitment. That's neither here nor there. Let's go to quarterbacks and start there. Mick, again, this list is not comprehensive. It does not cover everyone. We've got 4 2028 quarterbacks. The Buckeyes obviously have a 2027 committed in Brady Edmonds. It feels like to me, like this is an opportunity for Champ Mons to get a chance to see Champ Mons, who's the number one player in the country, according to On3 Rivals in the 2028 class. Like, doesn't this feel like a kid who's going to go to Ohio State or Texas?
It certainly does. Well, or maybe Florida or some of these like other schools can just throw big bags of money down the SEC. But like in terms of relationship, getting on campus, like Ohio State's done a great job with Champ Mons. We got both of his both of his parents on campus this summer. I think you might have not been in town for that camp when he threw at that 7-on-7 camp. I thought he was very impressive that day. And you and I just were kind of talking to some people after a practice on Wednesday, and who you guys like that's coming up this weekend, and they wouldn't really give us any specifics, but they all mentioned that they were happy to see Champ Mons coming back up to campus. So
yeah, he's the only one that was like that they were willing to discuss by name. Other than that, it's, well, we need to see this, and yeah, we need to figure this out. So Champ Mons, we've talked before on this show in other iterations about like Neiman Lawrence and other 28 quarterbacks, but Champ, from a size standpoint and everything that he's put on display when he visited Ohio State this summer, he certainly seems to be elevating. Donald Tabron from Cass Tech will be in town as well. Lucas Prock, who camped this summer with Ohio State. And then on Thursday, Greg Smith of Rivals posted on the Letterman Row message board that Matthew Lee, a 6'7" quarterback from Illinois, will be visiting. He's working with Brad Mandler, apparently. Mandler, who's an Ohio-based quarterback trainer, quarterback coach, most famous for his work with Drew Aller, is now working with Matthew Lee. So he becomes a guy I think people will start to hear about. Let's go to running backs, because I know that this is an area where you're super stoked. We talked earlier about the changing philosophy when it comes to the Ohio State coaches and seemingly choosing narrow recruiting boards. And I think that Carlos Lachlan has a pretty clear-cut top of the board with his first choice in David Gabriel Georges. But if there's a weekend that he's going to have this season that could potentially like open doors to change that approach, it has to be this one, right? I mean, you got borderline 5-star Keemon Spell, committed to Penn State. He's from Pennsylvania. Said earlier this week that there are 6 teams with a great chance of flipping him, I guess. And again, that's what I'm saying, man. It's easy to be like, why do I still follow recruiting?
There's a lot of people that say that, whether it's on the Letterman Lounge message board or on Twitter. But if there is a guy on this list that you should follow the recruitment of, it would be David Gabriel Georges. Again, he's going to visit this weekend. He's visited a couple times. He's down. This will be
his 3rd visit since April.
Correct. And he's down in Chattanooga, Tennessee now, but he's by way of Quebec, Canada. All his family's coming in this week, and I believe mom, dad, aunt, uncle, and uncle's an Ohio State fan from what I've been told. And obviously, like you mentioned, this is Carlos Laughlin's weekend to get ahead, build the relationship with Keemon Spell, Noah Roberts from Arizona, Elijah Kimball is another guy, and then Ty Phillips is somebody that I told you I would like to see added to this list, just because I think Ohio State really likes him as maybe a second running back if you can get David Gabriel Georges. But when the game's over and this whole the clock strikes 0, win or lose, I think the one that they're going to spend time with, get dinner with, and do what they can to see his family, it's going to be David Gabriel Georges, which I think is a kind of their next big step in getting him closer to committed if they can get him there.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think people should know about this show and just about the conversations we have all the time in general is that sometimes lights just come on, right? Sometimes things change. Sometimes you're sitting here having a conversation and you go, well, I didn't think of it that way before. And now I'm just thinking about something that I was just thinking about in a totally different way. I'm wondering, Nickelodeon, this. The narrow recruiting board, it seems to me at a place like Ohio State that will, I believe, especially at positions like running back, tight end, linebacker, etc. It seems like in this new NIL era, maybe it does make some sense to have a very narrow board with your super top guy every other year. You know, because if you look at 2026 running back recruiting for Ohio State, it was a fairly expanded board back in the spring. And by the first weekend of June, it was just Favor Aki, right? And everyone else had been essentially eliminated from it, not by their doing, but by Ohio State saying, you know what, we're changing our approach here. Some of that, I think, is related to the roster in understanding that You only have one upperclassman at running back, and that's CJ Donaldson. James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon are both in their second year. And then you've got 3 first-year guys and Turbo Rogers, Bo Jackson, and Isaiah West. And then some of that is realizing that, oh, maybe Bo Jackson and Isaiah West are pretty freaking good. And then some of it is saying, but let's look at the roster from a strategic point of view. We're going to need that bell cow, big time bad, blah, 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 beep, 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 censored beeps type of running back in 27. And now you've got him circled. And it's going to be a battle between Ohio State, Tennessee, Georgia, et cetera, a couple other schools in there for David Gabriel Georges. But like, I feel like maybe in these smaller position groups, that is the path that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you can look at it a little bit. I don't know if Ohio State would ever take the first round pick philosophy to tight end, despite what Keenan Bailey would like to believe.
Oh, I think he will. As long as Keenan Bailey's the position coach, I think he's going to, be punching the table to make sure that happens.
But I think if like Mark Pantoni goes around the room and points at assistants and said, you guys get a first round pick this cycle, I think this is shaping up to be the cycle where Carlos Lockwood kind of gets his guy. Obviously, like you mentioned, you get those 3 guys last cycle, you get Favor IQ this cycle, and it's like, all right, now's your turn. You get the money, you get the budget to go get David Gabriel Georges if that's your guy. And it's similar to kind of what Keenan Bailey wants to do at tight end. Like you got 2 guys you really liked last year. I think they expect Nate Roberts to play early as a freshman. Brody Leonard's going to be a good player, but all they have committed in this class 2026 is Corbin Fordham, who's a talented player from Florida, but he's still kind of a 3-4 star level guy. So can we go get Brock Williams now with a first, second round pick type of NIL evaluation on him if we're still speaking in those terms? Like that's the biggest thing in my eyes, because I think you did a great job of breaking it down a couple weeks ago on Leonard Monroe of like what positions are they going to need to spend first round picks on this cycle, and it's running back, a little bit of tight end on offense, and then you got to go get some guys on defense, the defensive line and corner, which I think is reflective of kind of these visitors list.
Yeah, as you look at this list, and I apologize if you're watching this on the internet, the font that I used is fairly small, but there was no other way to fit all these names on one board, so I didn't want to have 47 different slides. Brock Williams visiting, as Mick alluded to, he is Illinois based. He is Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Oregon. Like the teams that you don't want to recruit against when it comes to recruiting for a tight end. Those are the teams that Ohio State is trying to win that battle against. It's unfortunate. Like if you think about Brady Edmonds not making it this weekend, perhaps the biggest residual impact from that is that it doesn't give him an opportunity to hang out with Brock Williams. Those two have become very close friends, and it was something that the Buckeyes were hoping they could put those two together this weekend. Jordan Karlhoff from Columbus DeSales High School, teammate of RJ Day over there. So he picked up an Ohio State offer this summer, big talented tight end. And then Colt Lumpress from Connecticut, another tight end coming into town for Keenan Bailey to have on his visit list. And Mick, if you could, let's run down the offensive line again, folks. There's 100+ visitors coming. We don't have everyone on this list. I've put a good number of the offensive linemen that have an offer. And again, what you see here is a seemingly different strategy from Tyler Bowen than we ever saw from Justin Fry. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Georgia, Texas. It's not being confined to one area. It's not being confined to one body type. It's not being confined to one position group. Like Tyler Bowen is saying, hey, come one, come all. We're going to need 5 or 6 offensive linemen every single class from here on out. And which of these guys do you think has the chance to have the dial move the most this weekend?
Dial move the most, I would probably say Quay Ford, just because he's the 4-star guy out of Texarkana, Texas. Never been on campus before. Charlie Dickey's been working there. Tyler Bowen's been working there, but good to get him up on campus. And I really do think guys like Jimmy Kalis, who's from Pittsburgh, younger brother or half brother of Kyle Kalis, who I think Birm could probably tell the audible story of what happened there about. I had to look it up online when I was standing on the sideline last week watching him. And then like Mason Wiltz, another guy, St. Clairsville.
There will be blood.
If Mason Wiltz, somebody like, could they get him in the class early, like after this weekend? I don't know. He doesn't have a ton of visits set up. I just think the most fascinating thing with this offensive line list of like, if we say Sam Gruge a first round pick this cycle and they get 4 good guys, I think there's a case you could make if these first 5 guys, which are Kellen Weimer, Mason Wilt, Jimmy Kalis, Cale Wagner, and Luke NJ, like that could, if they want to take 6, all 5 of those guys could conceivably end up in this class.
Yeah, I would say that, like, for me, after seeing him at the Under Armour camp, after seeing him at Ohio State this summer, like, I'm slightly enamored with Luke and Jaychuk. I think he's like the type of offensive lineman I want to build a program around. Just big, nasty dude. Cam Wagner is a little bit the same way. I really like those kids from Illinois. I'm not sure that I would put anybody on commitment watch of this group, but like if there's one that I think would be not entirely surprising, it might be Jimmy Kalis, because he's been on campus so much. His sister goes to school at Ohio State. Yes, he's from Pittsburgh, but like it seems as though the relationship with Jimmy Kalis is different than anybody else, just based on the fact that he's been on campus so much to see his sister. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. I know that Notre Dame is involved there. Michigan just offered recently. Kellen Weimer from Liberty Center, Ohio, up in the Northwest Ohio part of the state, Northwest Ohio part of Ohio, Northwest Ohio.
Toledo native, by the way, folks.
He is actually a Michigan fan growing up, so it'll be fascinating to see what happens if and when the Wolverines offer there, if that really changes the tenor at all. But it seems like Tyler Bowen has done a really good job establishing that relationship early as well. So again, a lot more visitors than just these that are on this list, but hopefully it gives you folks a sense of what's out there. We're going to flip over to the defense. It is a smaller group defensively, but that does not mean that there is any lack of star power. And Mick, for me, like, we're going to run down this list, but the defensive line, as you mentioned earlier, kind of seems most paramount.
Yeah, Chris Whitehead, Anthony Sweeney are like the headliners. They're both near 5-star guys. I think if the right cycle ended today, like they'd be 5 stars according to the rival industry ranking. Like Ronaldo Perez is a top 150 guy from right down the road in Gahanna, like Columbus Academy. Jameer Weiss is a 2028 kid who they need to keep working on early because he's going to be of another 5-star caliber. And I really like Jace Brewer when I went out and saw him in Indianapolis a couple of weeks ago. Like he's probably in that top 50, top 2, like, or 150, top 200 range with Ronaldo Perez, but he's a talented player. And if you're taking that Tyler Bowen, let's take bodies approach to the defensive line, he's someone that you want to take alongside like a Chris Whitehead and an Anthony Sweeney. So ideally they could get a lot of these guys in the class down the line, but it's just good to get them on campus this weekend.
Commitment watch of that group. I mean, I would, I don't know how much more Ohio State has pushed for Ronaldo Perez since he camped in Columbus, like 47 days in June. You'd think that if Larry Johnson really got aggressive there, that's one they could wrap up this weekend, especially if the atmosphere is right and the Buckeyes win the game. I think that's one you could see some movement. I would also say that that's a possibility for Jameer Weiss out of Trotwood Madison, his older brother, his class of 2026, committed to Purdue. So, you have a couple guys there in the state that I think Ohio State has the ability to turn up the heat on and say, hey, look, you're the foundation of this program, and we can't do it without Ohio kids, and we need you to be the leaders. So we'll see how that works. I really like Braden Parks too. If we're moving on to linebacker or whatever, like he's a guy that I think you really told me in June, like, hey, like they want big defensive linemen. They want big defensive linemen. And Braden Parks shows up. He's probably 6'2", like 280, 290 pounds. Like he's not the biggest guy, but he's got a little of the Jarquez Carter, like good hand usage, good like get off. He's someone that I think just earned an offer with how good he was at camp. Like we can't let a guy from Chicago that's this good not earn an offer. And it's good to get him on campus as they try and keep him away from like a Notre Dame, who I believe he's a legacy of, but still good to get him on campus. And I think he's a guy that Larry Johnson and Tony Washington and Miguel Patrick have done a good job with early. So him before we move on to DBs. Listed at 6'3", 305. He is of the group of defensive linemen that we have listed here on the screen, the only one of them that I would consider like a true defensive tackle of the current group. And, that is not the position that will be a primary focus in 2027 for Ohio State. It's going to be defensive end. That's the biggest need. But the fact that he's coming in this weekend should not be glossed over for sure. James Laurinaitis is going to have a pretty easy weekend, I guess. Josiah Poyer from St. John Bosco out in California is the only linebacker that we have on our list as far as named and key players to watch. He does not have an Ohio State offer yet, which makes him somewhat unique on this list of players that we're highlighting. And I have him on the list without an offer because I'm just going to be shocked if he leaves this weekend without one, because I don't think that we would have been given his name as a visitor without some purpose behind it. So let's flip over to the defensive backs. And Mick, this is going to be an interesting subplot to watch if you're into interesting subplots. I was told earlier this week that Ohio State was considering bringing in some visitors from around the state of Ohio who had good first weeks of the senior season as sort of a reward to say, hey, you are now on the Ohio State radar, right? Doesn't mean much, doesn't mean anything. You're on the radar. We've seen Ohio State host players around the state all the time, preferred walk-on possibilities, etc. So then I prodded a touch and I said, hey, can you give me a name or two of some of these guys that maybe were going to be brought in this weekend as, hey, you had a good first week. Let's be serious. Let's see if we can start a relationship. And then I was told, actually, we're not bringing in anybody in the 26 class inside of the state of Ohio unless we think we're really going to offer them. Okay. Which I was like, okay, makes sense. So then Thursday morning, when I get a text message from Amari Miller at Pickerington North that he's visiting this weekend, then I go, that is weird, because I have asked multiple people that are in the defensive back recruiting conversations whether or not they felt like there was any in-state defensive back worth really diving into. And the answer has been not yet. And now Amari Miller's visiting this weekend. I don't know what it means. Maybe it means nothing. The Buckeyes have a great relationship over there in Nate Hillrich at Pick North, so I understand. Maybe it's just a favor. I don't know. Maybe it's because Jack Sawyer is probably going to be in town and they're bringing all the Pick North kids over for a celebration. I have no idea. But I included him on this list because I'm intrigued by him as a player that missed a lot of time his junior year because of growth spurts and injuries to his legs that he couldn't basically move because he was going through a growth spurt. So we'll watch and see what happens. Ace Alston, however, in the 2027 class from Cincinnati Anderson, that one feels like it does. I don't know. Mick, we spent time at the start of the show talking about the in-state corners in the class of 2026 and all of them going elsewhere. And like, I think we're both of the mindset, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in speaking for you, but I think we're both of the mindset that at this point we would have Ace Alston out and going somewhere else. But yet he's on the list for this weekend, and his teammate Antoine Higgins is not. What do you make of
that? I make of it that Tim Walton understands that. I think Tim Walton is a little more proactive, especially with these defensive back guys. I think he's been recruiting Ace for a while, and there's still a good relationship there. Like, I think they want to see more from Ace, and they would have liked to see more from Ace this summer if he could have came to camp. No, Anderson didn't come to the 7-on-7 camp like they've done the past couple of years, and Ace didn't come to camp independently. So knowing that, I think it's left a little sour taste in Ohio State's mouth. I think Ace probably would want to hear more from Ohio State just from the individual side. So win or loss, it's just going to be good to kind of get together for these two to figure out whether they need to start putting in more energy towards each other, or whether it might be going their stuff, like not going their separate ways entirely, or just
break up.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the important thing for kids around the state to realize. Like, Ohio State, while they may appreciate your talent, they may think that you're someone that can grow into an Ohio State caliber player. Like, they are not going to beg anybody in the state to show them interest. If you're a player who wants love and an offer from Ohio State and you don't camp there in the summer, it is viewed negatively upon you. Like that, there is no other way around it. Like, they want to see you compete. They want to see you come out and see how you stack up against the best players in the country. And they want to see how you stack up against all the dudes from Florida that make a trek to Central Ohio in June, or Louisiana this year, with 9 of the top 12 players in the state of Louisiana visited Ohio State, and only 3 of the top 12 in Ohio in 27 did. So like, something's backwards. And it's not because Ohio State is deciding to not focus on Ohio. It's just because the kids in Ohio, I think a lot of them finally have an opportunity to get what kids around the country have gotten for years, and are just taking full advantage of it. In Ohio State, I don't know, and I'll say that I think maybe they're a touch. I'm not going to say out of sync with it, but I think that they would prefer that the kids in Ohio be the old way, right? Like, hey, we love Ohio State, we want to go to Ohio State. There's no point in going somewhere else or visiting somewhere else, but that's just not the world we live in. Because again, then you have kids like Aaron Washington and Danny Lang coming in from California, teammates of Chris Henry and Caden Dixon Wyatt at Mater Dei. And like Aaron Washington and Danny Lang are trying to make it to Columbus as much as they possibly can. Then you have kids 2 hours away that won't come up and visit. So it does get confusing. Of the list of defensive backs that are on here, Mick, I'm calling out a couple, but what makes the Danny Lang and Aaron Washington recruitment so interesting to you?
Just because we've heard a lot about Aaron Washington from the Ohio State side. Like, he didn't camp this summer, and it's still been like, oh, we love Aaron Washington. Like, he came to campus and watched Danny Lang work out, but he was in a boot and he was not able to go. I don't think he played in their ESPN televised game over the weekend, but Danny Lang did, and he had a few pass breakups. Like, I think he kind of earned the stamp of approval from Ohio State. Like, all right, you're up on the board with like Aaron this summer. And it's the same thing of like Caleb Elkins is not like in that same similar territory when it comes to just guys that I think move their way up this offseason. Like, he had a good May. He injured himself doing high jump and track, so he didn't get to camp. But he still came up this past like for a weekend and got to spend a weekend with Matt Guerreri. So those are the guys I'm kind of like. I think we should probably be talking about a good bit when it comes to defensive backs, just because they've got them on campus a couple times. The same thing with I think it's Isala Wiley Ava. I believe it's from
California. He visited for the spring game and was a guy that was super impressed with Ohio State. I've talked to him a lot since then. He's coming with Josiah Poyer, his teammate at St. John Bosco. But like,
and he's coming with Gavin Williams, who's like one of the 7 on. It's just this list is so large, folks, that like Birm did this morning, and it's still getting updated with names like Gavin Williams, a 4-star safety from Damien, California, has already confirmed that he will be coming as well with, I believe, another 4-star defensive back. And then we haven't even talked about Tayshaun Poole or Kenneth Sullivan. Like, this whole defensive back group is loaded, and it's just hard to keep up with all the names here.
Yeah, and one that's on the list here, again, if you're watching this on YouTube or on your television or on 10 TV Plus or wherever it's at, one name that you see on this list is Angelo Smith. That is the younger brother of Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, who you may have heard of if you pay attention to Ohio State football. Angelo was offered by the Buckeyes this summer at camp and was pretty impressive. Now, it does not have the size profile that his brother does at this point, but Angelo, he moves like Jeremiah, man. It's kind of funny. Like, you see these kids, and I mean, I have 6 older brothers, so I understand it, but not everyone's built the same and looks the same, but there are mannerisms and there are ways about you that you're like, man, that's a Smith. That's Jeremiah's brother. You could just see it the way he moved. Very impressive. Caleb Elkins is one that you and I are both, I think, pretty high on, from Indiana, a player that did not camp at Ohio State this summer because of injury as well, as you mentioned. But if there's a commit watch on this list, is Caleb Elkins that guy for you? Because I think he is for me, but I also don't expect it. And so I don't want to put him on commit watch because I'm not sure Ohio State's ready to go all the way in on anyone yet, honestly, in the class of 2027. But I think he's a player that is very serious about the Buckeyes.
Yeah, he's someone you and I talked about. Like, if you're not getting guys from commits from Ohio guys or like local Midwest guys, and it's difficult to feel like you can hold on to him at this point, Caleb Elkins would obviously fall into the Midwest guys. Yeah. And he was originally, I think he only really had like Ohio State and Indiana scheduled for game day visits. He's since scheduled visits to like Tennessee and Alabama. But like, when it comes down to it and you actually got to get in the car and drive that way or fly all the way down there, does your heart change a little bit? Do you look at maybe going to Ohio State to see the Ohio versus like this night game against Ohio, or do you look at maybe coming back for the UCLA or Rutgers game or even the Minnesota game? Like,
yeah, that's so much easier, man. Like, it's like an hour and a half drive and you're there and you don't have to worry about all the other crap. And it's hard to
definitely like 2.5 hours, but Birm just drives with about 80 miles per hour from.
No, most of the time I'm just asleep, so I kind of lose track of time. I've made this drive, and again, anyone watching this at home knows that I'm not in my home office/studio. I'm at Austin's house in his office. I've made this trip so frequently that I don't know when the drive begins or ends anymore. So I assume everyone else is the same way. Let's switch up the approach here, Mick, and we're gonna narrow down the MIVs. The most important visitors for Mick Walker this week. You've got Blaine Bradford, David Gabriel Georges, Chris Whitehead, Aaron Washington, and Brock Williams. Let's start with Blaine Bradford because we both have Blaine Bradford on our list and both have him as the top person on our list. For a guy that has been securely, solidly, comfortably committed since March. Now it feels all of a sudden like there's what is this weekend going to bring type of vibe.
Yeah, like we said earlier, it feels like Blaine and his parents have realized, oh, you guys really need me in this class, or else it kind of falls apart. And now
that's the hard part, isn't it, Mick? Like, even let's just read, if we can, the comments from Stacy Bradford to Blaine's father to Sam Spiegelman of Rivals and On3. Ohio State has not made any mistakes, the elder Bradford told Spiegelman. Blaine is a 17-year-old kid with the pressure of Death Valley hovering over him. Blaine will have the final say, so as of today, we navigate the space. As of today, he is a Buckeye. You say, and I'm not, this is where I'm trying to find out what's the truth, right? Is this Blaine Bradford and his family and his representatives deciding how important they are to the Buckeyes, or is it just the representatives deciding how important they are to the Buckeyes and deciding, hey, let's just push the envelope here and see what can happen? Because there has been nothing for 5 months but positive reinforcement about how Ohio State is the spot. There is no other question. There is no, and even in that quote itself says Ohio State did nothing wrong, has done nothing wrong. Why would the tone shift now if it's not just to see how much different you can make the money? And this, again, Ohio State is not expecting Blaine Bradford to come to Columbus for free. That is an important note here. He committed when he did, similar to what I said about Kari Wilder earlier, for a reason. And it is not because he was interested in getting some ribbons for a charity or something like that.
Yeah, and I think if you really want to be like, oh, wow, like, obviously Ohio State lost Sam Petito, who is a Louisiana native, who was the director of player personnel at Ohio State. Like, he had a good relationship with Blaine and his family. But and if you want to say, oh, maybe Sam's in his ear, I think Sam probably is in his ear, but I don't know. Like,
it's his job now.
I don't think that changes the dollar in the sense. And anyway, like, I was always led to believe that Michael Hunter, who's the assistant defensive backs coach, who's another Louisiana native, he was probably more of a key cog in that whole relationship than Sam Petito was. But again, it feels like it does certainly boil down to money, and it's just interesting because you and I had talked for weeks about, like, oh, at least if they don't get Blaine or Braylon Womack, they'll at least be able to be like, we could show Blaine that we're all in on him. And now it feels like Blaine's go, oh, you are all in on me. Now, why don't you show me more financially that you are, so that way I'm locked in as well.
Yeah, the leverage piece has changed not at all, but yet it seems like they're trying to increase leverage, which is,
and this is nothing from Stacy or Blaine or anything. Like, nobody's outwardly said like it's about money, and like nobody will ever say that, but
it is. We're all well aware of that. That's what it is, and it's fine. I think it'd just be better if people just said that, like, because again, it's not as though Ohio State has not put an aggressive financial opportunity in front of them, which is why he committed when he did. David Gabriel Georges, as you talked about, number one running back on the board for Carlos Lockwood in the class of 2027. Chris Whitehead, top 35 defensive end in the country from Virginia, the top 35 overall player and defensive end from Virginia. Aaron Washington, the high 4-star cornerback from Mater Dei in California. Brock Williams from Illinois, tight end number 1 on the big board for sure. Any other comments on those players, Mick, before we switch over to Birm's picks for the MIV, most important visitors?
No, I think we kind of detailed it while going through the visitor list.
We've got a couple guys who are the same, right?
We feel like for most of those guys, it feels like those are like, if Ohio State a year from now say we have the X, Y, and Z first round picks, it would be guys like Chris Whitehead, David Gabriel Georges, Aaron Washington, and if you can get Brock Williams saying that he's a first round, like those would be the other guys that Mark Pantoni or sources or whatever you want to say down the line are saying these are our first round picks in the class.
Yeah, I have Blaine Bradford on my list as well. I have Chris Whitehead on my list as well. I have Aaron Washington on my list as well. I have replaced David Gabriel Georges with Reynaldo Perez because I think it's important to get somebody in the state of Ohio committed early. And I think that you need defensive ends in a major way. And even though he might be a little bit more of a project than Anthony Sweeney or Chris Whitehead, I think Perez physically, there's a lot to like, and I don't want that to get to a situation where another school starts to be able to really put their claws into it. I think it would be helpful, and it's the type of guy that I think, and this is not the show where we speculate on coaches' futures or whatever. But he's the type of player and person and a Columbus native that if by the time the class of 2027 is signing a letter of intent or whatever they're called nowadays, and Larry Johnson isn't at Ohio State, I don't know that he would be impacted by it as much as other guys. So I think when you talk about early commitments, you're looking for ones that are going to be stable and players that have less reason for volatility, less reason to move around. Reynaldo Perez is on that list for me. And I did not put Brock Williams on my list, even though I know he is the clear-cut number one tight end in the target book for Keenan Bailey in that class, because I believe that D'Angelo White and Jordan Carhoff are good enough that if that's your duo, it's not a step down, really. And now we'll see. I think Brock Williams is different than those guys. He's certainly different body style wise than D'Angelo White, who, I've had conversations with some people at Ohio State who think he might grow into an offensive lineman. I see a Darnell Washington type tight end. They get paid a lot of money to evaluate people. I get paid a little bit of money to talk to guys like Mick Walker about recruiting. And then I have Champ Mons. Oh man. His nickname, if he ends up at Florida, his nickname just got changed to Champ Mons on my list because he's the number one player in the country in the class of 2028, according to Rivals. And he's a quarterback, and Ohio State doesn't need to spend any more time really recruiting quarterbacks in 2027. So why not get a supersized head start in the class of 2028 and go ahead and add a commitment from someone like Champ Mons and next to Elijah Newman Hall in the class of 2028 and just start ransacking Florida that year, because by the time you get to 2028, Florida State will probably be down again. Florida will be replacing another head coach again. Miami will still be Miami, and Ohio State can just go in there and pick the fruits, man. Pick the fruit. So those are my 5 most important visitors of the weekend. Mick Walker, LettermanRow.com, has been joining me, Jeremy Birmingham, on Talking Stuff. That's what we're doing here. We're talking stuff about Ohio State football recruiting. Any final thoughts, Mick, before we kick ourselves out of here and go get ready for a Thursday night full of awesome football on television?
Not really. We've gone like an hour plus, 20 minutes over what Birm said he wanted to do originally, so we're doing great.
Because I just love talking stuff. And the fact is, we want to do this regularly.
I will correct you, though, that Bryson Wright, who's also from Florida, is the number one player in the country, according to Rivals, in the 2028 class. I imagine we will talk stuff about him at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, Bryson Wright is – I didn't look at the list, so you got me there. But I want to say this. I don't believe that he's a human being, so I don't count him on my list. He is the next. Whatever planet produced Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith, that is the planet where Bryson Wright hails from. So I don't.
Arvell Reed's come from the same planet, or like the backside of the planet?
No. Arvell is like the dark side of that planet's biggest moon.
Okay.
Like he's not even Arvell, like
Veli. Please.
Have you seen like Alien versus Predator or any of those, or Alien Planet World or whatever?
Yeah.
Like whatever that planet is, that's what Arvell's from.
Okay.
He's a freaking monster, but he's different. Like in the planet that Jeremiah and Marv and Bryson are from, it's like all fluid motion everywhere. It's like the Avatar planet.
Well, you're from the planet Toledo. A lot of people view it similarly.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have compared Toledo to Avatar for a long time. There's a lot of great football on, like I said. Thursday night should be a heck of an evening. Friday, plenty of stuff on 97.1 The Fan, who will be live out at the Lane, on Lane all day on Friday, including myself and Austin Ward. Will be out there live doing a live show at 2:30-ish in the afternoon. We've got a Friday morning edition of The Beat coming with a couple of Ohio State captains joining us. We're going to do some bold predictions, and then it's on to game day. Mick Walker from LettermanRow.com, a member of the On3 network, has joined me for this episode of Talking Stuff. Really appreciate you being here, Mick. Thank you very much, and I hope it was everything you hoped it would be.
It wasn't more.
If you're watching this, like the video, like us on YouTube, subscribe, hit the little bell that lets you know when we have new content, because that's always important. And overall, in general, thank you for your patience waiting for Talking Stuff to return. We will be consistent with Talking Stuff throughout the season. I have not yet scheduled the night of the week that this is going to happen. I'm not sure if it's going to be Mick all the time, or I'm going to bring in Sam Spiegelman or other folks from time to time, or maybe my old bald friends. I don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, appreciate you watching. Thanks for being here. We will see you on the next show. Goodbye.